It's just insurance stuff, Dad. Sign here, and we're done. My daughter's pen was already in my hand before I understood I hadn't asked for it. The words hit me like a slap delivered in a church whisper. 42 years of marriage, and Eleanor's casket was still warm in the next room. Before the ink could touch the page, a hand closed over the file and pulled it away, and my wife's best friend leaned in close and said, "Don't sign a single page, Robert. Not one." I didn't understand why. Not until my lawyer walked through that door 20 minutes later, and his first words made my heart sink to the floor. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is what I built, and what I gave away without ever once feeling like I was giving anything away, because that is what you do for the people you love. I spent 41 years as a machinist, and then a shop foreman at a tool and die plant outside of Dayton. The kind of job where your hands tell the story of your life better than your face does. Eleanor taught third grade for 36 of those years, and between the two of us, we never made what you'd call real money. But we made enough. We paid off a house on Larkspur Lane by the time I was 53. We put both of our children through state school without loans, which in this day and age might as well be a magic trick. Denise, our oldest, got a business degree she never used the way we hoped. Michael, 2 years behind her, moved to Colorado and became an engineer, married a good woman named Priya, and calls his old man every Sunday at 4 o'clock without fail, rain, or shine, disaster or not. I gave Denise $68,000 over the course of 9 years. I know the number exactly because Eleanor kept a ledger, a real one, spiral bound, the kind you buy at a drugstore, and she wrote down every check we ever wrote to either of our children, so that one day, she said, we could look back and know we did right by both of them equally. 22,000 for the down payment on her first house, back when her husband Craig still had steady work at the dealership. 11,000 when the roof needed replacing and insurance wouldn't cover the full cost. 9,000 in 3 installments when Craig lost that job and the mortgage payments started slipping. 6,000 for her daughters. Our granddaughter Ashley's. Braces, and then again for a car when she turned 16. The rest came in smaller pieces, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. Birthday money that was never really birthday money. Groceries slipped into her purse when she visited and thought I didn't notice. I noticed everything. A man who spent 4 decades machining parts to a tolerance of 1,000th of an inch does not stop noticing things just because the thing in front of him is his own daughter's face. I don't say any of this bitterly. Eleanor and I built our lives on the idea that family helps family. No questions, no scoreboard. We married young, at 22 and 23, in a ceremony that cost less than $400, because that was all either of our families had to spare. And we spent our first 2 years in a rented apartment above a hardware store on 5th Street, where the radiator clanked so loud in winter that we used to lie awake, laughing about it instead of complaining. Eleanor used to say that the two of us had never once, in 42 years, gone to bed angry. And I want to be honest and tell you that isn't quite true. There were nights, plenty of them, when one of us stormed off to the guest room in a fury over something that seems small now and felt enormous then. But we never let a fight outlast the sun. That was the rule we made in that cold apartment on 5th Street. And we kept it for 4 decades, through 2 children, through a layoff in 1991 that nearly cost us the house before we'd even finished paying for it, through the ordinary erosions that wear down every long marriage if you let them. Eleanor was the kind of woman who remembered every student's birthday for 36 years of teaching third grade, who kept a garden of tomatoes and zinnias that neighbors used to stop and admire from the sidewalk, who could quiet a crying child or a crying husband with the same steady hand on the back. When people asked me, over the years, what the secret was to a marriage like ours, I never had a clever answer. The truth is only that we chose each other again every single morning in small, unglamorous ways for 42 years. And I did not know, until the week she died, how much of that same quiet devotion she had also been spending, in secret, to protect me from a truth she thought I couldn't bear to carry. But somewhere in the last 3 years, something in Denise's manner toward us changed. And being a careful man, I started keeping my own kind of ledger, the kind you keep in your head, the kind made of glances and pauses, and the particular way a person's voice tightens when they think you're not listening closely enough to catch it. The pattern started small, the way these things always do. Denise began asking, almost casually, whether Eleanor and I had ever gotten around to updating our will. She'd bring it up at dinner, fold it inside some other conversation about a neighbor's estate dispute or a news story about elder fraud. Always concerned for us. You two really should have things in order, she'd say. You don't want Michael and me fighting over anything when the time comes. I told her we'd handled it years ago with Gerald Finch, our lawyer, a man who'd done our closing on the Larkspur house back in 1987 and had done right by us every year since. That answer never seemed to satisfy her the way a simple answer should. Then there was the matter of the checking account. In February, 3 months before Eleanor passed, Denise suggested, gently, reasonably, the way a poison is always administered gently and reasonably, that it might be smart for her to be added to our joint account. Just in case Eleanor's health took a turn, in case I had trouble getting to the bank, in case. Eleanor had been diagnosed with the cancer in January. Stage 3, pancreatic. The kind of diagnosis that doesn't leave much room for hope, only for the arrangement of what time is left. I understand now, looking back, that Denise heard "in case" and started planning around it in a way that had nothing to do with our comfort and everything to do with her own. I said no to the account, gently. I told her Gerald had power of attorney documents ready to go if we ever needed them, drawn up years before, naming Eleanor and me for each other and, failing that, naming both children jointly, with a clause requiring both signatures for anything beyond routine bills. Denise's face did something in that moment I didn't have a word for yet. It would be another 2 months before I found the word, and the word was disappointment. Not disappointment in me, but disappointment that a door she'd been trying to open had stayed shut. Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning in April, at home, in the bed we'd shared for 42 years, with me holding her hand and Michael on speakerphone from Colorado because he hadn't made the last flight in time and never forgave himself for it, though I told him 100 times there was nothing to forgive. Denise was there too, in the room, and I will say this for her. Whatever came after, in that final hour, she cried real tears, and I believed them then, and I believe them now. Grief and greed can live in the same heart. I didn't understand that until later. I understand it now. The memorial was 8 days after. We held it at Faith Lutheran, where Eleanor had sung in the choir for 3 decades, and the reception afterward was in the fellowship hall. Folding tables covered in the paper tablecloths the church ladies always use, casseroles arriving faster than anyone could eat them. I was sitting near the coffee urn, numb in the particular way you're numb when you've just watched 200 people file past a photograph of the person you loved most in the world and tell you how sorry they are when Denise sat down beside me with a manila folder in her hands. "Dad," she said, low, close to my ear, the way you speak when you don't want the people around you to hear. "I know today is awful. I know. But I talked to the insurance company this week, and there's a filing deadline on Mom's policy, and if we miss it, it complicates the payout. I had the papers drawn up so we can just get this handled, and you don't have to think about it again." She had a pen out already, uncapped, resting across the folder like it belonged there. "It's just insurance stuff. Sign here, and we're done." I want to tell you, I was suspicious in that moment. I wasn't. I was hollowed out, sitting in a church basement in the same black suit I'd worn to my own father's funeral 30 years before, and my daughter was offering to make one thing easier. And I reached for the pen because some tired, grieving part of me wanted, badly, for one single thing that week to be easy. That's when Carol Whitman's hand came down over the folder. Carol had been Eleanor's closest friend since they were both 26 years old and pregnant, at the same time with children who would grow up two houses apart. She'd flown in from Arizona the moment she heard, and she'd spent the whole week at our kitchen table doing the thousand small tasks that grief makes impossible. Answering the door, organizing the casseroles, fielding phone calls I couldn't bear to take. She was 70 years old, small, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who says exactly what she means and has never once regretted it. She pulled that folder toward herself with a grip that surprised me, and she looked at Denise with an expression I had genuinely never seen on Carol's face before, not in 40 years of knowing her. And she said, "Don't sign a single page, Robert. Not one." Denise's face flushed red. "Carol, this is a family matter." "This isn't." "It'll wait," Carol said, still looking at me, not at Denise at all now. "Whatever it is, it will wait. Ellie asked me to do one thing for her if anything ever happened, and I intend to do it." She reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone, and I watched her thumb move across the screen, and I didn't understand any of it. Not the request, not the urgency, not the particular steel in a 70-year-old widow's voice at a moment when everyone else in the room was speaking to me in whispers made of cotton. "I already called Gerald," Carol said. "He's 20 minutes out." Denise stood up so fast her folding chair scraped against the linoleum, a sound that seemed to carry across the whole fellowship hall, and half the mourners turned to look, and she said, too loud for the room, "This is unbelievable. My mother just died and you're staging some kind of intervention?" She looked at me, and her eyes were wet. And I want to be honest with you. I could not, in that moment, tell if the wetness was grief or fury or fear, and that not knowing sat in my chest like a stone for the entire 20 minutes that followed. Craig, her husband, put a hand on her shoulder and steered her toward the far end of the hall, murmuring something I couldn't hear, and I sat there next to Carol with the folder, now resting closed on the table between us, unsigned, and I did not have the first idea what I had almost done. "Carol," I said, "what is this about?" She took my hand, the way she'd taken Eleanor's hand 1,000 times over 40 years, and she said, "Ellie knew something was wrong months ago, Robert. She didn't want to tell you while she was still fighting, because she didn't want you carrying two griefs at once. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would not let that girl put a pen in your hand until Gerald had seen whatever it was first." Her voice cracked on the word girl. Because Denise had been a girl, Carol bounced on her knee once, had been a bridesmaid at Denise's own wedding, had loved that child nearly as much as her own. "I don't know what's in that folder. I only know your wife was scared of it." 20 minutes is a long time to sit in a church basement, not knowing why your chest feels like it's caving in. I remember every minute of it now, with a clarity that the rest of that week refuses to offer me. I remember the smell of the funeral potato casserole someone's mother-in-law had brought. I remember Ashley, 16 years old, my granddaughter, sitting 3 tables away, not understanding why her mother had stormed off, texting on her phone, oblivious. I remember Michael, who'd flown in the night before, standing near the coffee urn with a paper cup he never drank from, watching the whole scene with the particular stillness of a man deciding not to ask questions in public. And I remember Gerald Finch walking through the fellowship hall doors in a gray overcoat he hadn't bothered to take off, folder of his own under his arm, his face doing something I had also never seen in the 38 years I'd known him. Gerald was not a dramatic man. He had handled our house closing, both of our children's college trust withdrawals, Eleanor's mother's small estate, and never once in all those years had I seen him rattled. He sat down across from me, set his folder on the table, and before he said a single word about the papers Denise had tried to get me to sign, he looked at me and said, "Robert, I need you to brace yourself, because what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, and I should have come to you about it 3 weeks ago, and I didn't, because Eleanor asked me not to until after the service. I think that was a mistake. I'm sorry." My heart did not so much sink as drop out of my body entirely, and I said, "Just tell me, Gerald." He opened his folder. Inside was a copy of a document I had never seen. A durable power of attorney dated 6 weeks earlier, my name on it as the grantor, a signature at the bottom that was meant to look like mine and did not, upon any real inspection, look like mine at all. Denise's name was listed as agent. Beneath it was a second document, a quitclaim deed for the house on Larkspur Lane, transferring ownership from Eleanor and me jointly into a trust with Denise as sole trustee. Both documents had been filed, not fully executed, but filed, prepared, notarized with a notary stamp from a strip mall shipping store 40 minutes from our house by a notary who, Gerald had already confirmed by phone that morning, had no memory of ever meeting either Eleanor or me in person. "Your wife found the notary's business card in Denise's car in February," Gerald said, "when she borrowed it to drive to a doctor's appointment because yours was in the shop. She didn't say anything to Denise. She called me instead. She asked me to hold everything, to say nothing to you, and to make sure that if anyone ever tried to get your signature on anything resembling these documents, someone stopped it before ink touched paper. She was terrified, Robert, that if she confronted Denise directly while she was dying, it would break something between you and your daughter that could never be repaired, and terrified that if she told you outright, you'd carry the weight of it through her final months on top of everything else you were already carrying. She asked me to protect you instead of telling you. I think, looking back, I should have found a way to do both. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I sat in that folding chair in the basement of Faith Lutheran with my dead wife's best friend's hand still resting on my arm, and I understood, all at once, the shape of the last 3 months of my life in a way I had not understood it while I was living it. The gentle suggestions about the joint account, the casual questions about the will. The folder produced at the one moment in my entire life when I was least capable of reading fine print, timed to the hour, to the minute of my wife's memorial service. I want to tell you, I felt rage in that moment. I did feel it, eventually. But what I felt first, sitting there, was something closer to grief laid on top of grief. The specific and terrible grief of understanding that the daughter I had given $68,000 to without ever once asking for it back had been, in the final months of her mother's life, quietly working to take the rest. Eleanor's ledger was still at the house, in the drawer of her nightstand. And that night, after everyone had finally gone, I sat on the edge of our bed and read every entry in it by lamplight, going back 9 years, and I understood something I hadn't let myself understand while she was alive. Eleanor had not just been keeping a record of fairness between our children. In the last few pages, dated only weeks before her diagnosis, the handwriting changed. Smaller, tighter, the handwriting of a woman writing quickly and privately. There were notes there that weren't dollar figures at all. D. Asked again about POA. Third time this month. Told her no. She didn't take it well. D wants us to move accounts to a bank closer to her. Told Robert I forgot to mention it. I didn't forget, called Gerald. Don't tell Robert yet. Don't want him to worry while I still have good days left. My wife had spent the last good months of her life standing quiet guard over me, and she had never said a word, because she wanted whatever time we had left together to be about us, and not about our daughter's slow, careful betrayal. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee I never drank, and I made a decision. And the decision felt less like a choice than like something that had already been decided for me by every version of myself that had ever loved this family, honestly. I was not going to explode. I was not going to call Denise and scream at her, though God knows some tired, wounded part of me wanted nothing more. Eleanor had spent her final months protecting the peace of our family with a kind of quiet, patient strength I had watched her practice my whole life, and I decided that night that whatever I did next, I would do it the same way she would have, carefully, completely, and without a single wasted word. The next morning, I called Gerald and asked him to do three things. First, I wanted a full accounting of every document filed anywhere with my name or Eleanor's name on it in the past year. Every deed, every power of attorney, every bank form, everything. Second, I wanted him to immediately and formally revoke any power of attorney that existed in any form other than the original one Eleanor and I had signed together in 2019, the one that required both children's joint signature and explicit written consent from me for anything beyond routine expenses. And third, this was the hardest one to say out loud. I wanted him to open a formal file, quietly, in case what we found required more than a stern conversation at a kitchen table. Gerald did not flinch. He'd been Eleanor's protector these last months without me even knowing it, and I think some part of him was relieved, finally, to be building his case in the daylight instead of the dark. I can have most of this for you by Thursday, he said. There's one more thing you should know, Robert. The quitclaim deed. It was never fully filed with the county. It needed your notarized signature on the recorded copy, and it never got one because Carol stopped it in that fellowship hall before it could happen. If you'd signed those papers yesterday, the house transfer would have gone through by end of week. I sat with that fact for a long moment. My home. The house Eleanor and I had raised our children in, paid off dollar by dollar over 26 years. The house where she died in our bed 8 days before. One signature away from no longer being mine. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes to a man in his 70s when he realizes he has been underestimated. I had spent my whole working life being the quiet man in the room, the foreman who let the work speak instead of his mouth, and people had always mistaken that quiet for softness. I decided, sitting in Gerald's office that Thursday with a folder of my own, now 3 inches thick, that I was done being mistaken for soft. The plan we built had 3 stages, and I want to walk you through them, not because I'm proud of the deception. I take no joy in deceiving my own child, even one who deceived me first. But because I believe there's something worth understanding in how a quiet man builds a case instead of a scene. Stage one was simple. I said nothing. For 12 days, I behaved as though nothing had happened at that memorial. I took Denise's calls. I let her bring over a casserole on a Sunday and sat across from her at my own kitchen table and asked about Ashley's summer plans and said not one word about the folder, about the deed, about the notary stamp from a strip mall 40 minutes away. Every phone call, with Gerald's blessing and within the bounds of what our state allows for a single party consent recording, I kept a written log. Not a recording, just a log, times and dates, and the substance of what was said, because Gerald told me a pattern matters more than any single conversation, and I trusted him the way I'd trusted him for 38 years. Stage two was the discovery, and it came from a place I did not expect. Ashley, my granddaughter, 16 years old and grieving her grandmother in her own quiet way, started coming over on Wednesday afternoons after school, the way she'd done for years, to sit with me and watch the old game shows Eleanor used to love. Ashley did not know what her mother had done. Ashley loved her mother the uncomplicated way a child loves a parent, And I never once asked her to spy, never once asked her a single leading question. I want that on the record because I have read about men who use children as instruments, and I did not want to become one. But children hear things. On the second Wednesday, Ashley mentioned, offhand, stirring her hot chocolate, that her mom and dad had been fighting about money again, and that she'd overheard her mother on the phone saying, he has to sign eventually. Craig, he's 71, he's not going to live forever. And I am not watching Michael get half of everything when I'm the one who actually stayed in this state. Ashley didn't understand the weight of what she'd told me. She went back to her hot chocolate and the television. I sat very still and let the words settle into the case Gerald was building, one damning, human sentence at a time. There was a third Wednesday, too, one I think about often now. Ashley had brought over a shoebox of old photographs she'd found in her mother's closet, wanting to know who the people were in them. Eleanor as a young bride, Eleanor and Carol on a beach in 1979 with their hair teased up in a way that made Ashley laugh out loud. Me at 26 standing in front of a rust-colored Buick I'd been so proud of, I could still remember the exact payment schedule. We spent 2 hours going through that box, and somewhere in the middle of it, unprompted, unasked, Ashley said, Mom's been weird since the funeral. She keeps saying things about how nobody in this family appreciates what she does for everyone. I didn't press her. I only nodded and poured her more hot chocolate and let the sentence settle where it needed to settle. A man learns, if he lives long enough, that the truth rarely announces itself all at once. It arrives in pieces, dropped by people who don't know they're carrying it, and your job is only to be patient enough and paying enough attention to catch each piece as it falls. Gerald's accounting, when it finally came back complete, was worse than either of us had expected, though I suppose I should not have been surprised by that. These things rarely turn out to be smaller than you feared. Beyond the power of attorney and the quitclaim deed, there had been 2 inquiries made to our homeowner's insurance company in March. Not by me, not by Eleanor, but by someone claiming, on the phone, to be handling the estate on behalf of the family, asking about beneficiary designations and payout timelines for a policy on a woman who was, at that time, still very much alive. The insurance company's own records showed the calls had come from a number registered to Craig's cell phone, though Craig swore to me, and I believed him, that he had never made those calls himself, that Denise had used his phone because she worried that calls from her own number might be flagged, given how many times she'd already contacted the company that year about unrelated matters. Whether that was a small mercy or a larger indictment, I leave for you to judge. I know what I concluded, sitting in Gerald's office, turning that page over in my hands. There had also been an attempt, unsuccessful, to add a second name to the deed on Eleanor's late mother's small parcel of land in Kentucky. 12 acres of scrubby, unremarkable ground that had been in Eleanor's family for 3 generations and meant more to her, sentimentally, than its market value would ever suggest. That attempt had failed only because the county recorder in that jurisdiction required an in-person appearance, and Denise, it seemed, had not been willing to make the 4-hour drive for a piece of land she couldn't yet claim outright. I remember sitting with that fact for a long while. It told me something about the shape of what had happened that the forged signatures alone hadn't quite told me. This had not been one desperate afternoon of bad judgment. This had been a slow, patient, months-long project, worked at in pieces, the way a man on my old shop floor might work a difficult piece of stock down to its final dimension, one careful pass of the tool at a time. My daughter had learned patience somewhere. I only wish she had learned it for a better purpose. 2 weeks later, Craig called me himself, late on a Tuesday, and his voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Smaller, unsteady, a man carrying something he could no longer carry alone. He asked if he could come by. I said yes. He sat in my living room, in the recliner that had been Eleanor's favorite, and turned a beer bottle in his hands without drinking from it. And after a long silence, he said, "Robert, I need you to know I didn't want any part of this. I told her it was wrong. I told her from the beginning it was wrong, and she kept saying it wasn't stealing if it was going to be hers eventually anyway. She was just moving up the timeline. I should have told you the day she had those papers drawn up. I've been sick about it for months." He was crying by the end. This big, quiet man who'd married my daughter 20 years before and had never, in all that time, given me a reason to doubt him. I believed him. I still believe him. Grief and fear had made him complicit in his silence, but not in the scheme itself. And there is a difference, and I decided that night to remember it. Stage 3 was the countermove, and it is the part of this story I am least sorry for. Gerald and I went to the bank together and moved the joint accounts. The ones that had never had Denise's name on them, only Eleanor's and mine, into accounts held solely in my name, with Michael added as a secondary contact only, not a signatory, at my request, purely so that if anything ever happened to me suddenly, someone besides a stranger would know where things stood. We filed a formal notice with the county clerk's office regarding the attempted quitclaim deed, flagging it for review given the notary irregularities, which put the house transfer into a state that would require a judge's involvement to ever move forward again. Meaning, in plain terms, it would never move forward again. And Gerald drew up a new will, a real one, sat with me for 2 full afternoons while I said out loud, sentence by sentence, exactly what I wanted done with what Eleanor and I had built. And this time, there was no folder produced at a moment of weakness, no pen slipped into my hand at a funeral. There was only a quiet law office on a Tuesday morning, and a document that finally, truly reflected what I wanted, made with my eyes open. There is one more piece of stage 3 I haven't told you yet, because I debated for a long time whether it belonged in this story at all. And I've decided it does, because it says something about what quiet strength actually costs a man. Gerald advised me, as a precaution, to have the house formally appraised and photographed, room by room, receipts and serial numbers logged for anything of real value, in case a dispute over the estate ever escalated further than either of us hoped it would. I spent an entire Saturday doing that walkthrough with an appraiser named Mrs. Okafor, a brisk, kind woman who had clearly done this work in 100 grieving households before mine and knew how to move through it without making it feel like an autopsy of a life. But it was an autopsy of a life, in its way. I stood in our bedroom while she photographed Eleanor's jewelry box, the wedding ring I'd bought on layaway in 1983 for $11 a month over 2 years, the pearl earrings I'd given her for our 30th anniversary, and I had to step out into the hallway for a few minutes because my chest had gone tight in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the particular loneliness of protecting a home that used to hold 2 people and now only held 1. I did it anyway. I did it because Eleanor had spent her last months protecting me in silence, and the least I could do, awake and clear-eyed, was finish protecting what we'd built together in the open. I called Denise on a Sunday evening in June and asked her and Craig to come to the house the following Saturday. I told her it was time we talked about Mom's things, which was true, in the way that the biggest truths are often folded inside smaller ones. I asked Michael to fly in as well, told him only that there were things about the estate that needed to be settled as a family, and he came without asking too many questions, the way he'd always trusted me to have good reasons for the things I asked of him. They arrived Saturday afternoon. Carol was there too. I'd asked her to be because she had been the one who stopped the pen from touching the paper, and I thought she'd earned the right to see how it ended. And because some part of me, an old man's part, wanted Eleanor's closest friend in the room when I finally said the things Eleanor herself never got the chance to say. Gerald sat at the head of the dining room table, his folder. now considerably thicker than the one Denise had brought to the fellowship hall, squared neatly in front of him. Denise walked in already defensive, the particular defensiveness of a person who has spent weeks rehearsing an explanation for a question no one has asked yet. Dad, if this is about the papers at the church, I already told you. That was just. Sit down, Denise, I said, and I did not raise my voice, because Eleanor never raised hers either, not once in 42 years, and it had never once made her words carry less weight. I'm going to talk, and then you're going to have your turn, and I want you to know, before I start, that everything I'm about to say, I can prove. I laid it out for them plainly. The power of attorney with the forged signature, the quitclaim deed, and the notary who had never met either of us. Eleanor's ledger, the last entries, written in secret in the final weeks of her life because she was more afraid of what her own daughter might do than she was of the cancer that was killing her. Ashley's overheard phone call, which I did not repeat with any relish, only with the plain, flat honesty of a fact that needed to be said. Craig's confession, though I did not look at him while I said it, because I did not want him to feel I was using his honesty as a weapon against his wife, only as a piece of the truth the room needed to hear. You had those documents ready before your mother's body was cold, I said. You had a pen in my hand at her memorial service. 20 minutes, Denise. 20 minutes was the difference between you inheriting a house you didn't earn through a fraud you built and this conversation happening across a table instead of across a courtroom. Denise's face went through several things in the space of a minute. Fury first, red and immediate, the same fury I'd seen in the fellowship hall. Then something that might have been shame, though I confess I could not fully separate it from fear of consequence. Her voice, when it finally came, was thin. I was scared, Dad. I was scared that after Mom died, you'd forget about us, that Michael would end up handling everything from Colorado, and I'd get nothing. And I have never gotten anything. Not really. Not compared to what Michael got. And I panicked. And I did something stupid. But I am not a criminal. I am your daughter. And I did it out of fear, not greed. You had $68,000 from your mother and me over 9 years, I said quietly. Written down in a ledger by a woman who loved you enough to make sure you were never shorted a single dollar compared to your brother. That ledger exists because your mother wanted you to always be able to see, in black and white, that you were never forgotten. And 3 months before she died, while she was fighting for her life, you were driving to a strip mall 40 minutes from here to get a stranger to notarize a signature you forged because you decided you couldn't wait for the truth to unfold on its own. I did not say this cruelly. I want you to understand that. I said it the way you'd tell someone a wound needs stitches. Plainly, because the plain truth was the only kindness left available to give her. Craig broke first, the way I somehow already knew he would. He put his head in his hands at the table and said, I told her not to. God help me, I told her 100 times not to. And there was something in the wreckage of his voice that made even Denise stop and look at him. Really look at him, as though she were only now seeing how much weight he'd been carrying in silence on her behalf. Denise did not break the same way. She defended herself for a long while, circling the same justifications. Fear, fairness, the belief that whatever she'd done had only been moving up, something that would have happened eventually anyway. I let her talk. Eleanor always said that people reveal more of themselves in their excuses than in their confessions. And she was right, because somewhere in the middle of Denise's second or third pass through the same defense, she said something that told me more than anything else that afternoon. I just didn't think you'd notice, Dad. You never notice things like that. And there it was, the truth underneath the fear, the truth underneath the greed. My daughter had never believed I was paying attention. 41 years of machining parts to 1,000th of an inch, and my own child had assumed I was too soft, too grieving, too old to ever catch what she was doing. I noticed everything, I told her, and I said it the way I might have said it to a young apprentice on the shop floor who'd assumed the foreman wasn't watching his work. I noticed every check your mother and I ever wrote you. I noticed every question about the will, every push toward that account, every time you brought up fairness like it was a knife you were sharpening instead of a value you believed in. I noticed the folder in your hands before I'd even finished grieving your mother in front of 200 people. I have always noticed, Denise. I simply chose, for most of my life, to love you instead of confronting you. That was my mistake to make. It is not one I intend to keep making. I did not disown my daughter that afternoon, and I want to be honest about that because I know some listeners want the story to end with a door slammed and a name cut out of a will entirely. And that is not what happened because that is not the kind of man Eleanor married, and it is not the kind of man I intend to remain. What I told Denise was this. The new will Gerald had drawn up left her a fair and honest share, equal to her brother's, held for now in a trust that neither of them could touch without both signatures, and my continued oversight while I was alive, with full and unrestricted inheritance passing to her outright the day I died, exactly the way it always should have. I told her the house on Larkspur Lane was staying in my name, unencumbered, for as long as I chose to live in it, and that any future arrangement regarding that house would happen through Gerald's office in daylight, with both of my children present and informed, and never again through a folder produced at a moment of grief. And I told her, this part I had thought about for weeks, turning it over the way you'd turn over a part on a lathe, checking it from every angle before you trusted the cut, that I was not interested in punishing her for the rest of my life for one terrible season of fear and bad judgment. I was interested in whether she was capable of becoming, again, the daughter who used to call me on Tuesdays just to tell me about her day, before money and fear and the slow arithmetic of who got what had eaten a hole through the middle of our family. That door isn't closed, I told her, but you're going to have to walk back through it, honestly, one Tuesday at a time, and it's going to take longer than you want it to, and I am not going to pretend otherwise to make either of us feel better today. Michael, through all of this, said very little, and when he finally spoke, it was not to condemn his sister, but to say, quietly, I wish you'd called me the second mom, found that notary card, Dad. I would have come home. I told him I understood, and that some of the fault for the silence belonged to me too, because I had spent our whole family's life being the man who didn't want to trouble anyone. And that habit, I was beginning to understand, had cost us all more than it had ever saved us. Carol did not say much that afternoon at the dining room table. She sat near the window with her hands folded, the way she'd sat through countless family dinners over 40 years as an honorary member of a household that wasn't quite her own. And only once did she speak, near the very end, when Denise, exhausted and raw, finally went quiet. Your mother loved you the same as she loved Michael, Carol said, gently, but without any softness spared for comfort's sake. Every single day of your life, Denise. I watched her love you that way for 40 years. She didn't spend her last good months protecting you from your father because she thought less of you. She did it because some part of her still believed you'd find your way back before it was too late. I think you still can. But you're going to have to want it more than you wanted that house. I don't know if those words landed the way Carol meant them to. Grief has a strange arithmetic. Sometimes the truest sentence in the room is the one that takes the longest to be understood. But I saw something shift in my daughter's face when Carol said it. Something that hadn't shifted at anything I'd said myself. And I think that's because a mother's oldest friend can sometimes reach a place in a grieving daughter that even a father cannot. It has been 4 months now since that Saturday at the dining room table. I would love to tell you the story ends with everything healed, tied neatly like a bow, but real life doesn't work that way. And I promised myself the day Eleanor died that I would stop telling comfortable lies, even the small ones. Denise and I speak now, most weeks, carefully, the way two people speak when they are rebuilding a bridge one board at a time, and both know how far the fall would be if a board gave way. Craig and I are, strangely, closer than we've ever been. Grief and honesty have a way of doing that to men who never had much reason to talk before. Ashley still comes over on Wednesdays, and I have never told her the full truth of what her mother did, and I don't know if I ever will. Some inheritances are better left unhanded down. And Carol. Carol calls me every Sunday now, the way Michael does, because grief makes new families out of old friendships when you let it, and I have let it, because Eleanor would have wanted that most of all. If there is wisdom I've earned in all of this, and I believe I have earned some, it is this. Love does not require you to be blind, and boundaries are not the opposite of love. They are very often the only thing keeping it alive. I spent most of my life believing that giving without limit was the same thing as loving without condition, and I have come to understand that they are not the same thing at all. A man can love his children with his whole heart and still lock the account, still call the lawyer, still say the word no out loud in a kitchen where no has rarely been spoken. That is not a betrayal of love. That is, I have come to believe, one of its most necessary forms. I think often, these days, about the particular kind of strength Eleanor showed in her final months, strength I did not even know I was witnessing while I was living beside it. She was dying and in pain more often than she ever let on, and still she found the will to protect the peace of a family she would not live to see finish healing. I used to believe strength looked like the things I'd spent my working life around: steel and steady hands and a machine held to a thousandth of an inch. I understand now that Eleanor's strength was the harder kind, the kind that asks nothing of the body and everything of the heart, the kind that keeps a secret out of love rather than fear, that protects someone else's peace even while its own is running out. And to anyone listening who is sitting where I once sat, grieving, exhausted, with a pen someone else placed in your hand and a voice in your ear telling you it's just a formality, just paperwork, just something small, I want you to hear this clearly. Trust your hesitation. Trust the friend who grabs the folder before you can sign it. Trust the quiet feeling in your chest that says something is wrong, even when you cannot yet say what. You have spent a lifetime building what you have, dollar by dollar, year by year, sacrifice by sacrifice, and no grief, no matter how heavy, obligates you to sign it away in 20 seconds at a folding table because someone told you it was easier that way. Slow down. Ask the second question. Call the lawyer before you call it done. The people who truly love you will never resent you for taking the time to be sure. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? I read every message, and you mean more to me than you know. For more stories like this one, like this video, and subscribe. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.